Amen. So how many of you have known somebody who was negative? Anybody ever know somebody who's negative? Anybody ever been in a room with somebody that was so negative, by the time you left that room, you were exhausted? Anyone? I have. I have. It's an interesting experience. I remember one person once that I joked with them. I said, you know, if somebody came up to you and said the sky was blue, you would probably tell them that it wasn't. And this person looked at me and said, well, you're right, because the sky isn't blue. It's just a reflection. I was like, don't tell me all of that stuff. I don't want to know that stuff. It's interesting because we get into these patterns. As people, we like to be around negativity. We like to hear what's wrong about things. We like that. I know it doesn't sound that way, but oftentimes we're drawn to it. One just needs to look at any political season. This year is nothing new. Throughout the history of all politics, pretty much, the candidates would go after each other, highlighting all of the negative things, not necessarily lifting up all of the positive things that they were going to bring. But politics aside, we think about our daily life and what happens within our communities and our world. It's interesting as people study the effects of positivity and negativity. Some results can be mixed and not necessarily what you would expect, but by and large, most studies find that people who are happy do better than people who are not. That makes sense, right? When you give somebody encouragement, they tend to do their jobs better than when you tell people they're doing it wrong or bad. I remember when I was studying my first year of college, while I was still in the elementary education track, we watched a video of a classroom and a teacher doing an experiment with kids. She had the kids. They were pretty much the two classrooms, same type of kids, obviously different kids because it was a demonstration. And she looked at the kids and they were doing their work. The one classroom the teacher went into and was very critical of everything that the kids did. They looked at it. She commented on everything from the actual work they were doing to their penmanship to everything else. And then on the other class, they showed the teacher looking at everything. When the kid made a mistake, she found something positive to comment on the child. Even when they were doing it wrong, she found something good to say. This went on as you looked at these two scenarios, and the conclusion at the end of this video that it showed was that the kids in the positive classroom far outdid the kids in the negative classroom. They felt better about themselves, and more importantly, they remembered the stuff later, that they learned it. They just didn't recite it. It was interesting because one of the fascinating things was that the kids in the negative classroom actually did better on the test immediately after the lesson. But they didn't retain it. They lost it. Where the kids who actually were encouraged, remembered, and lived into it. Now, there's a lot of factors that go into that. But it's something to think about because, again, as a people, we are often drawn to negative. We're taught that, being harsh, being critical, being all of that stuff is good. It creates character. It creates identity. It creates strength. But strength isn't always what we get from that. In fact, when you hear negativity all the time, you get defeated. You get kind of put out. Here in Philippians, we see some folks that Paul is saying, we need to encourage these people. They're working hard. The implication of what is that they're struggling with the work that they're doing. They're not getting the compliments. They're not getting the encouragement. They're not saying, hey, you're doing a good job. All they're at is going through the motions of the work that they're having, and they're struggling. It's when the mind is telling them, yes, you're doing what you need to do, but the heart is lagging. We get to that a lot, especially in these last months as we've been struggling with this coronavirus in our lives. There are so many times, I'm sure I have felt that way, and I know that probably many of you have felt that way, when you're going through the motions, just trying to get through the day. And it's hard to be positive because you're struggling with this situation that you're in. I know this last week, I kind of got to a head about Tuesday into Wednesday. And I just kind of threw up my hands and said, I'm sick of all of this. I'm sick of it. And I know that I was building into a very negative place. And I saw that. And it bothered me. It bothered me that I was letting everything get on me so much that I was losing myself into this spiral of negativity. It's easy to do. We can find so many reasons to justify going down that road. The problem with that I was finding was that I was being absolutely non-productive in anything I was doing this week. And for me, that's really frustrating because I like to do a lot of stuff and work on different projects and things like that. But I was letting the negativity overwhelm me to the point where I just wanted to sit and do nothing. Even to the point of sitting doing nothing and not even turning on the television because I was just feeling that way. And it's easy to go there. And just about that time that I was going into my spiral, a friend called me. And as we talked, I began to see where my negativity, where that spiral was going. And I was able to snap out of it. As I laughed and talked and moved on, I regained myself and realized how important it is. My friend who can always come back and say without saying it, hey, you're doing a good job, just keep going. That you're making a difference, keep going. I don't always hear that, but this week I did. And it changed me to get out of that funk. It brought me from this place of despair to a place of hope. As Christians, one of our responsibilities is to bring joy and love and hope to other people. It's not to come down and be critical about what's happening, but to be really connected with the hope and to see what is doing well. Even in the most negative of situations, you can still find positive things. As you'll hear from Ross probably in a week, our church finances aren't good right now. September was our lowest giving month in a long time. It's easy to dwell on those things. It's easy to dwell in that of saying, where are we going to come from? How are we going to make it through the rest of this year if we don't have the money, if we don't have the things? And we can go down the spiral of worry and pain that will bring us to. Or we can choose to look at it a different way, as a challenge, as an encouragement, as a time to listen, and a time to pray, and a time to look at what's actually going well. Because while maybe the finances don't look the greatest, there are lots of great things that are going on in our church and in our community. There are a lot of good things that we can lift up. About 15 years ago, I went to a seminar about church growth and understanding how churches need to look at themselves. And the philosophy of this program was really simple. They said, look at what you're doing well and do it better. And eventually, the things that you're not doing well will just fall off. I was skeptical, of course, as I listened to this be told to us and shown to us. And then it started to make sense. Because what the presenters said is that when churches are in places of struggle, oftentimes they put so much energy into what was and fixing the problem that they have no energy for what comes after the problem is fixed. And so they said, if you spend time doing what you're doing well and building upon it, well, then you've got a lot of extra energy to be putting into similar activities that will build upon what you have the skills for, not necessarily building upon where you might have had skills in the past and don't have them anymore, or things that have just come to an end. It was interesting to listen to that because it was a different mindset. And it's a different way of looking at things. It's a way of looking at what we're doing positively rather than complaining about what no longer is and was. In this time of coronavirus and in this time of great change that we are in, we have to remember that what was never will be again. Even when we come back to worship, it's going to be different. There are going to be small changes, and there are going to be big changes. Some people will no longer be coming here because they've moved away or died. It's going to be different. And when we come back to church, we can sit there and we can say, oh, how different this is. I'm not comfortable with the change. I'm not comfortable with it. Or we can make the choice and say, hey, I am so glad to be back in this place. So glad to see the faces of the people. When we do that, we'll be in a remarkable place. A friend, early when I was on my mission trip after high school to South Dakota, I spent a lot of time with the Reverend Sid Bird. Sid was a Dakota man who grew up on the Lakota Reservation in southeast South Dakota. His tribe was from northeast South Dakota. But Sid was a really incredible person to listen to, and his stories and his life and his experiences were life-changing for me. One of the stories that Sid liked to say and told me went a little like this, and I'm not Sid, so I can't say it the way that he did, but he said, there is an ancient Indian myth that goes like this. When you meet a stranger, you know what to expect by what happens when you first meet them. If you meet them and they smile, then you know it's going to be okay. If you meet them and they scowl, you know it's not. If they smile, you can trust them. If they scowl, you can't. That's an interesting thing. I think about that little message that he gave me, and we talked about that a lot. He said the problem that the Indians had with the white people as they came into the country was that the Indians didn't know who these people were. And when they met, the white people looked with a scowl on their face, with the idea of, what are you doing here? Not with love, but with judgment and contempt. Interesting, because the white people were the new people. But that's not how they viewed the situation. We do that a lot still. This is part of what our current culture calls privilege, and that when you have power and you have muscle behind you, you can do things and view things in a certain way. But it also comes down to how we interact when we go into situations. Do we go into situations with our power on our sleeves, or do we go into situations with our love on our sleeve? Do we go into situations where we are pushing our agenda, or do we go into situations where we respect the others who are there? When Paul says, finally, beloved, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is pleasing, whatever is commendable, if there is any excellence and if there is anything worthy of praise, think about these things. Keep doing the things that you have learned and received and heard and seen in me, and the God of peace will be with you. We are called to look at everybody as a child of God. We are called to be positive in the midst of the devastation and destruction that we might see around us. We are called to love one another as God has loved us. We are called to be Christians and not to worry and not to put our own self-preservation above the dignity of all other people. You see, we don't have anything to worry about in our lives because we are with God. So why do we act out of the fear? Why do we meet others with a scowl? Why are we always so negative? Wouldn't it be better if we all just went out in love? Amen.